tutorials in video games are very important. You need to know how to play a video game going into it. I mean, if you've played a first-person shooter, you probably played every other first-person shooter. You know how to shoot, you know how to move, you know how to reload. There might be some, specific features for a specific game, like dodging, taking cover. But once you've played one type of genre, you've kind of played all of them. But that has not stopped game companies shoehorning in these obnoxious, huge boxes that pause the gameplay and give you this laundry list of features that you need to know before progressing. Did you know you could press the jump key to jump? Did you know that you could press the fire button to fire?
Press the B button while jumping from here to do a special attack.
I did not know. Thank you, video game developer, for pausing my game to teach me that. Honestly, if you played any AAA game in the past 5 years, you've had this problem. And to fix it, there is a good method. It's just kind of very difficult to do so. I saw this video. What was it? Any tutorial you remember playing sucks.
Most developers spend a lot of time crafting their game's ending, even though not every player will get to see it. However, the tutorial is part of the first few minutes of your game. Why do they have such a bad reputation? And how exactly do you craft a good tutorial? It's no wonder tutorials have a bad reputation when...
My favorite kind of tutorial is when you get control of the game and then it says, press mouse stick forward to walk. Those are my kind of favorite tutorials because you just know that you're going to be taught every single tutorial in painstaking detail. Did you know you could press square to reload? What? You get games as well that don't even have it bonded to what you're playing on, like an Xbox or a PC or a PlayStation. So it'll literally say stuff like press the reload key to reload.
So many games treat them like afterthoughts, and this most likely comes from either a time or a budget constraint. However, most of the time developers seem to be scared that players won't experience their games the intended way. So as a result, they end up spoon-feeding information to players, resulting in the dreaded hand-holding tutorial. I mean, have you ever wondered why the nice lady guiding you by the hand is named Toriel? So, the best
oh my god, I get it now. Okay.
to teach your players the mechanics of your game is to do it invisibly, blending them in perfectly with the gameplay without altering the pacing in any negative way. Asher Vollmer, the designer of Threes, in his GDC talk identified these 4 core attributes of a good tutorial. It should teach, comfort, excite, and respect the player. So
I think excite and respect are the hardest ones to get because I've never seen a text box open before telling me press forward to walk and I've gone, oh my god, I didn't know I could do that.
take a look at some common mistakes developers usually make when crafting the first few minutes of their gameplay. Firstly, it's probably not a good idea to ask your players to make an uninformed decision. For example, I would suggest avoiding greeting the player with an option to either play the tutorial or start the game. This frames the tutorial as an afterthought, slapped as a separate experience on top of what is considered to be the game.
I don't think I don't agree with that. I don't really see the problem with having the option to do the tutorial or skip it because obviously the tutorial could be for someone that is literally never played a video game ever, which is such a small amount of people. But obviously you always need to cater to that small group of people who it literally is like Babby's first video game. So I get that. So the option to play it or the option to skip, I don't really mind that. I don't really see that as much of a problem. For example, Gears of War. Because that was Gears of War 2, I think he's shown there. If you've played Gears of War 1, you'll know exactly how Gears of War 2 works.
Teach and maybe comfort the player, but it will probably not respect and definitely not excite anyone. Instead, why not weave the learning experience throughout the gameplay itself, blending it in seamlessly? In the party game Toto Temple, your main way of moving around is a directional dash. So instead of creating a tedious tutorial, the developer, Juicy Beast, crafted all menus to be interacted with by dashing into buttons. If you are worrying that by weaving the learning experience throughout the gameplay itself might annoy some players that are already familiar with the game's mechanics, then consider adding the IKEA shortcuts equivalent in those first few minutes. In BioShock Infinite, in the first few moments of gameplay, you make your way through a carnival fair where each exhibit is designed to teach you a certain mechanic. However, it's completely up to the player to walk up to those exhibits and interact with them, putting agency into the player's hands so those who are already familiar with the game can simply skip all of those without having their pacing affected at all.
BioShock Infinite is a game that has not aged well, by the way. I played BioShock Infinite, I think last year. It has not aged well, like gameplay-wise. It's very superficial. The thing is with BioShock games, they've never been good at combat. BioShock games have never had like meaty, heavy combat. Like the shotgun in the original BioShock is probably one of the worst shotguns in a video game ever. It just has no weight to it. None of the BioShocks age well. I think story-wise they do. Not Infinite. Infinite's kind of lame and it retcons a lot. But I think BioShock 1 and 2 have a very interesting story. I think Infinite, like when it does all the time travel and retconning, I thought that kind of sucked a little bit.
Next up, a big no-no you should keep your eyes on is avoiding overloading your player with information. This is one of the bigger mistakes you can do as a designer, and one example of this is the overly complicated control layout scheme shown to players before they even got to make their first step. Throwing so much information at the player up front is the equivalent of that one friend we all have that explains the entire board game for half an hour before anyone even starts playing.
I've got wood everywhere.
I have no friends. I have no friends to explain the board game to me.
Yeah, and you need the wood to win the game. This is bullshit, Mark. Want to play again? I do.
Another example of this are games that feel the need to expose the players to their entire UI all at once, instead of introducing it gradually. Chances are you probably don't have to show the player their weapon wheel if they don't have a weapon yet, so instead hide that UI element until the player picks up their first weapon. This way you keep the screen space clean while introducing the player gradually to new concepts without using the dreaded pointed arrow, which you shouldn't use to begin with. It's recommended to avoid front-loading your game with...
To be fair though, that was Crash Bandicoot, and that would have been played by actual toddlers. Like obviously grown men like us, chat like us, but also toddlers.
Too much information, because you will simply overload the player while neither exciting nor teaching them anything. And then there's my least favorite outdated tradition, the pop-ups. These are the classic, we didn't have enough time to craft the proper tutorial, so here's a PowerPoint presentation. They are notoriously bad because in the interactive medium of...
I think, okay. Personally, I think with pop-ups, unfortunately, with the way games are, they're kind of a necessary evil. The one example I can think where they're actually beneficial is when you've got like a skill tree, and then before you spend the point on the skill tree, you can like look at a preview to see how the ability works, and then like a little visual demonstration of how it works in the world, like how it affects enemies. I think that's a good tutorial. I think the only better one would be able to actually use the ability yourself and load up like a room where you could try it in.
Games, they completely break the game's flow, bringing it to a halt while also preventing you from interacting with anything. It's one of the worst ways of introducing your mechanics to your players.
Oh wow, imagine a tutorial for sprinting. Sprint to move faster. You can't shoot or reload during a sprint. Wow. I didn't actually know sprinting made you move faster than walking. That's damn.
Because they won't be exciting at all, but more importantly, it fails miserably at respecting those players. Doom Eternal is one of the more recent examples of being particularly guilty of this. There is actually more to say about Doom's pop-ups, and
I don't think that's a problem though. I kind of think once you know how a glory kill works, that's it. And I'm pretty sure in the options you were able to turn the tutorial messages off, because that opening level literally is just a tutorial. It's a giant tutorial for people that jumped into Eternal and they didn't play the original.
But going back to pop-ups, it seems that the entire industry is aware of this problem, to the point where back in 2013, Far Cry Blood Dragon poked fun at this exact issue, bombarding the player with ironic pop-ups every few seconds.
That's kind of genius.
Only for
I like
Far Cry 4, developed by the same studio, to do the same thing a year later, unironically. If you absolutely must introduce your mechanics with a short sentence, then look at how Dark Souls implemented this. With high contrast, easy to spot messages sprinkled throughout the level, requiring the player to consciously interact with them so they end up being fully optional. Alternatively, just like Splinter Cell Blacklist did, you can completely avoid the pace-breaking problem by infusing these hints diegetically right into your level design. That way, you at least fix the respect problem out of the four.
I think that's a bit of a cope. I don't know. He's basically saying Dark Souls is better because you have to make the active decision to interact with the sign to get the tutorial. Like middle mouse button camera controls. I don't think it's that much better. And again, a lot of games, you can just turn the tutorial messages off completely. Also, who's playing Dark Souls on mouse and keyboard, so don't respect anything this guy says for the rest of the video.
That way, you at least fix the respect problem out of the four. And continuing on the topic of text, it's definitely not advised to throw walls of text at your players. These
that actually
worse
looks
versions
awful.
of pop-ups that require your players to spend even more time disengaged from gameplay. I used to make a lot of Flash games back in the Newgrounds days, and back then the player's attention span was so short that if the loading screen wasn't engaging enough, they would close the browser tab. And not much has changed since then regarding attention spans, especially with the knowledge that games can be refunded during a time frame of a couple of hours. So teaching me...
Look how much shit is going on that screen. Look at that. That puts my brain to sleep. What is this? The Division? That's awful. That is actually awful. To be fair, I'm not going to lie. I feel that Star Wars Survivor did that. It threw so many tutorials at you at the very beginning, and I'm someone that didn't play the original Fallen Order. I started off on Survivor. So me playing that, I was so overwhelmed. The only thing I do in that game really is use one lightsaber stance and then parry. That's it. I don't use any of the Force or anything unless it's like actually, you know, necessary for progression.
At a minimum, at best.
No!
So those were all the things to stay away from. No uninformed decisions, no upfront information overload or walls of text, and no interruption of gameplay. Simply avoiding those pitfalls will lead to a better tutorial design, but let's switch gears and actually talk about some concrete steps towards designing a good invisible tutorial. I keep saying
I don't know why he's got EDM for like the transitions.
invisible tutorial because the secret is right there in the name. Invisible. But I think I managed to boil down a good formula into a single sentence. Teach gradually through gameplay. The idea here is to take the mechanics that you want your players to learn and instead of condensing them all in the beginning of the game, stretch them throughout the gameplay experience itself. While easier said than done, this can be achieved by using various tools and techniques, one of them being the idea of breaking down your mechanics into bite-sized pieces. In 2007, when Portal came out, it had to teach its players a very novel mechanic, almost never seen in games before. So instead of relying on pop-ups or walls of text, Valve instead took the main focus of the game, the portal gun, and gradually introduced the players to its functionalities. Firstly, by starting the game off without a portal gun at all, showing players the basics of how portals themselves work, followed by...
I remember listening to, because what Valve do with their games, which is really nice, they have a developer commentary. So you can actually listen to the devs talking as they made the game. And one thing they all wanted to make sure with the level design is to never have a tutorial pop-up. There are little pop-ups that appear, like, you know, right trigger to shoot right portal, left trigger to shoot left portal, X to jump or whatever. But they did the same in Left 4 Dead 2. And in Left 4 Dead 2, in Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2 is interesting because I remember listening to a dev commentary on Left 4 Dead, and one of the devs said, we have tutorials like, here is where your ammo is, press R to reload, press E to open a door. And then they said, once the game feels that the player understands how a certain aspect works, we will never show that tutorial message ever again. It's completely erased from the game script. So that's cool. I think Valve's minimalism with stuff was like really interesting.
Giving the player an incomplete portal gun that shoots a single portal, only to introduce the fully functional dual portal gun a few minutes later.
The device has been modified so that it can now manufacture two linked portals at once.
In a parallel universe, a worst version of Portal would probably start you off with a full portal.
Not the map as well, man. Not the map. You're doing it dirty. You're doing it dirty. They should have like Clippy or Bunsy Buddy like giving you help as well.
And highlight spots.
Not the map.
On the wall to show you where to shoot your portals, instead of making the smart decision of breaking up the gun's functionality and introducing the player to it gradually. This also makes use of the idea of introducing new mechanics in a safe environment. In order to achieve this, your game will have to allow players to observe mechanics in a safe environment within the game's world, before being allowed to interact with them on their own. In Half-Life Alyx, after the player was given enough time to learn how to fight the appropriately named headcrabs, the developers wanted to step things up a notch and introduce an armored headcrab with a weak spot on their underside. So after progressing through the level, you are gradually exposed to these new spiky growths on walls, standing out quite a bit from all the other visual elements on your screen. after which you are asked to go through this well-lit narrow hole in the wall, in front of which is an armored headcrab shell flipped upside down. And a few moments later, your eyes are guided down this hallway so you can be greeted by the first armored headcrab you see. It's scripted to lounge towards you while being conveniently stopped by a fence through which you can shoot the bright glowing spot that is contrasted against the specifically picked blue light in the room.
To be fair, a lot of games do that though, where they'll show an enemy like behind a barbed wire fence or a wall or something.
Both Mark Brown from GameMaker's Toolkit and Egoraptor Sequelitis have great videos with examples linked in the description below. Half-Life Alyx, as well as Valve
Pretty good for the design to show the enemy's weak spot without having something like a text box pop up. Yeah, no, definitely. Definitely.
Games in general are great.
I mean, the fact that it glows is usually indicator enough, right? Because usually, like in video games, where'd you go for a weak spot? The head. And if not the head, then whatever's glowing. Like there are, I'm sure he's about to say this now, but there are zombies here that have a weak spot. And if you shoot it, they explode like kind of a grenade.
Guiding the player by using various techniques to subconsciously direct their attention. And that brings me to the next category. Guiding the player can be done subtly.
It's like the regenerators, right? The regenerators in Resi 4. There was never a tutorial for them. You just saw them, you blasted the shit out of them, and you were like, what the hell, they're not dying. And then you got a sniper with a thermal scope on them, and then you kind of saw that they had weak spots. You shoot the glowing spots, and then they died, like permanently.
And most of the time it's achieved through creating contrast with light, or even through the help of framing within your level design if you're extra sneaky.
I mean, that's not a good example of framing, because that's literally meant to be a joke. That is literally meant to be an ironic joke in Stanley Parable.
Within your level design if you're extra sneaky. It can also be achieved in a more direct way, like the runner vision in Mirror's Edge or the cables that connect the puzzles together in The Witness. Here is a quick design trick. If you squint your eyes, you should be able to tell where the game wants to direct your attention. One example I like to bring up is the placement of coins in Mario games, like in New Super Mario Bros. U, where this trail of coins hints that you can both glide through the air and also double jump, without using a single word. And Nintendo has been using this trick for years, like in Mario 64, where you can find a secret shortcut by following this line of coins.
Damn!
It's all about subtly...
Yeah, I really want to play Super Mario 64. I've never played it before. I've never played it, but it looks fun. It looks really fun.
Nudging the player in the right direction, and you know you've done it.
Isn't Mario 64 like the best Mario game of all time? Like the highest rated? I've never heard anyone say a single bad thing about Mario 64. One of the best games ever made.
Good job if you manage to do so without them ever realizing it. There's the classic example of Mario starting off on the left side of the screen to suggest that you have to move towards the right, or in Metroid, have you noticed that you start slightly off center? Because even though you can explore in both directions, the developers want you to go left first because that's where you will find the morph ball, which allows you to progress further later on. This kind of tutorial design overlaps with another concept I like to call keeping things invisibly seamless. These are little experience-changing decisions you make as a designer behind the scenes without telling the player. For example, in a card game, you might secretly move cards around in the draw pile without the player's knowledge to make sure that they get just the right card they happen to need in order to either learn a new mechanic or create a memorable encounter. In the first minute of Ratchet Deadlock, you are asked to look at the enemy to your left, then to the enemy up above. What the game doesn't tell you is that it was taking into account which direction you were moving your thumbstick in order to set your controls to either default or inverted automatically.
Halo did that as well. I think the intro to Halo 2 did the exact same thing. It kind of like made you look the same direction either way. Chat, I want to see now, how many of you actually use inverted? Because honestly, if you use inverted, you're a fucking psychopath. That's just my opinion. How many people use inverted? I don't understand how people can use inverted. Mostly no's. I assume the amount of people that use inverted are the same amount of people that are left-handed.
I have made an entire video about the invisible tricks I've implemented in my own game Move or Die in order to make sure that players would get a memorable experience regardless of any RNG shenanigans. There should be a link on the screen right now. Now, these kind of invisibly seamless moments create a smoother experience for the player while maintaining a solid gameplay pace. And if you want to take your tutorial to the next level, consider designing it within the context of your game's narrative. In Metal Gear Solid Phantom Pain,
Tomb Raider 1, when I was a kid, had one of the hardest tutorials I've ever played in a video game. Because Lara Croft would narrate you through the game, and all she would say is, press the action key to jump. Press the jump key to jump. Press the climb key to climb. And I was just there as like a fucking 10-year-old, like just pressing random buttons, and then I ended up falling too high and snapping her neck.
Just being woken up from a coma. Similar to Assassin's Creed 2, where you learn to move your legs and hands as the first thing you do after you were born. This can also be used as a more direct external form of guidance, like in Matrix Path of Neo, where you are being told exactly what to do through a phone in order to navigate the cubicles, just like in the movie.
Wait, wasn't Matrix Path of Neo terrible though? Or I might be thinking of Matrix Reloaded. It's got a good user score though. It was Enter the Matrix, right? That's the one I played as a kid. I played that as a kid. You could pick Ghost or Niobe, that's right.
Now, if you'd like to do it in a more subtle way, look at how Bastion did it, where the omnipresent narrator drops occasional gameplay hints disguised as third-person storytelling. Now, these are all good guidelines to follow when you craft your tutorial. Keep things easily digestible, introduce mechanics in safe environments, guide the player through level design while keeping the experience invisibly seamless, and wrap everything into the game's narrative. But now I'd like to go over a few more things to keep in mind and decisions you have to make that will directly impact the quality and effectiveness of your tutorial. One important concept that should be discussed more is the idea of gaming literacy. When crafting your tutorial, you will have to assume how gaming literate your players will be. For example, if you're making a platformer game, are you designing it for someone who speedruns Celeste every Tuesday or for someone who never held a controller in their hands before? When making this decision, you can take the path of Overwatch and assume the players don't know anything about shooters and you teach them how to look around and move. Or alternatively, you can take the path of Playdead's Inside and let players figure out their first steps completely on their own without any help. There is no real...
That was good. That was good that they did that. The thing is with Inside, if you play Inside and you never played Limbo, you will die a lot. But I think that's kind of what they're going for with that game. It's meant to be like a really brutal game, and the fact that death is just so easy and like instantaneous that it's kind of like, shit, well, that happened.
Completely on their own without any help.
It's kind of genius because by not teaching you the mechanics of that game, it almost builds on how gloomy the atmosphere is.
Players figure out their first steps completely on their own without any help. There is no real good or bad answer to this. It all comes down to what kind of experience you want to create within the first few moments of your game.
Fuck this shit!
No. Okay. Oh no.
Everything went fucking bad.
We've all seen this, right? We've all seen this. Dumbass journalists can't get past tutorial. This guy here is like the sole reason why whenever you say you're a gaming journalist, you'll get laughed at. It's like the only thing that's worse than being a YouTuber. I don't understand like how... He's not even pressing the dash button, by the way. He's not pressing the dash button at all, like even when he's on the ground. I just don't understand how you can be this stupid. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Like it says right above you, dash, quick evade on ground or air. It is literally saying in the air, bro. And he thinks if he jumped there, okay, he dashed once, okay. We got some progress. And now, like that brief pause there, his mom's like offering to take the controller off him, and he's like, no, mom, I got this. I'm 45. You need to like, just give me some space. Okay. Kind of lame, but he knows what to do. He went the opposite way for some reason. That's fine. You got this, ma'am. You know what to do now. Okay, yeah, okay. We're nearly there. Just do it, and then, yeah. Now, if you pushed yourself a little bit more forward, you could have got it. Based. Jesus Christ, that was painful.
You should also take into consideration any generally agreed upon standards that might smooth out that learning experience. For example, it's very likely that your players will already be aware that anything red probably means danger, while anything green is most likely good, like your health, unless you're making an anime fighter health bar.
Unless it's Dark Souls, and green usually means poison.
Once these standards are cemented into the industry through various games taking advantage of them, you can go the other route and flip them on their head on purpose in order to subvert expectations. Stanley Parable is a great example of this. Right?
Wait.
On purpose.
Is that actually real?
To subvert
That's fucking evil. Who at Nintendo placed that, man?
Stanley Parable is a great example of this, right alongside other games like Antechamber, Superliminal, as well as the entirety of What the Golf. So that's a lot of things to keep in mind, and it doesn't help either that crafting a good tutorial is no easy task, taking a significant amount of time and effort. And at this point, I'd like to honestly ask you if you know of any good tutorial examples from any games out there.
I like how when he's talking about a good tutorial, he's showing Superman 64, which is renowned for being one of the worst video games ever made in human history.
Examples from any games out there, because I'm sure there's a few examples that I've missed. You know exactly where to reach me. So right now you might ask yourself, what are some things that I can do to take full advantage of that development time? And I've got just the answer. You could use level design to craft the intro sequence in such a way that players can return to it later on and experience it from a new perspective with their newly acquired knowledge of the game's mechanics. A small-scale example of this is in the perspective bending fez, where you start off in your...
How is it W game? It's not W game, bro. The entire game is just going through fucking rings. That is it. Apparently that is the... Hang on. Should we look up a speedrun? Okay, so we did it in an hour. Poor bastard. Is that really... That is the whole game? Grab and throw 3 robots to protect the people. Okay. Okay, there's actually other gameplay here. There's other gameplay. Wow. That is amazing. Wow. Truly riveting gameplay. The entire game is just rings. There is nothing else here apart from going through fucking rings. Onion rings. I like how the city down there as well is just like, it's just literally Google Maps. Oh, now he's walking around. Okay. And what's he doing? He's trying to glitch through the wall probably for like a speedrun strat. Let's see what happens at the end of Superman. Just that same sound effect over and over of him flying. It just looks fucking awful. Yep. The end. It just says the end. Wow. I am... Well done. You managed to get your friends out of this nightmare by flying through onion rings. But in the real world, Lex is still here. Why is it zooming in and out? Is that it? That's the whole game. They actually credited themselves on that fucking slop as well. That's insane.
Your 2D room, only to go out and gain the ability to rotate the entire world around you, after which the game restarts and you find yourself in your room with a newly gained ability to explore it in 3D. Another example of this is in the starting area of Dark Souls, but I'll let you Google that one. Alternatively, some other games like Call of Duty and Titanfall turned their tutorial into a shooting range / training course. The beauty of this is because they are timed, they effectively become high score chasing minigames, spawning entire speedrunning communities trying to figure out new strategies in order to get a faster time, drastically increasing the game's replay value in the process. Now, before I wrap up this video, there is one more thing to mention. Even though it's strongly recommended, it's not actually required to teach your players the mechanics of your game. Just like going against the grain and subverting expectations is an option, so is completely leaving out the tutorial on purpose. Starseed Pilgrim intentionally avoided the traditional tutorial, making the exploration of gameplay and discovery part of its design charm. Sometimes tutorials are left out unintentionally due to ongoing development, and within the right type of game, they might end up creating an unintentional, memorable...
I can't look at this and just not think it's Superman 64. I just can't. I can't look at this and think it isn't Superman 64, man.
Learning experience. For example, I vividly remember surviving my first night in the beta version of Minecraft, having to figure out what to do on my own while playing with the crafting wiki page open on my second monitor. Another example of this was the release of Pokemon Go, where certain mechanics were not explained at that time, for unrelated reasons, leaving you to interact with other players in the real world in order to explain those mechanics to each other, reinforcing the social aspect of the game.
Look at this!
Holy shit.
There's a Vaporeon that spawned.
What year was
right
that?
there, so everyone's running.
Remember going out? In the end,
What year was that, Pokemon Go? 2016, that's right. Jesus. Yeah, I remember that was huge, man.
think the entire
Oh my god, hang on. It lost 79% of its... Hang on. And by mid-September, had lost 79% of the players. Damn, in the same year as well. That's insane. But yeah, to be fair, for a player base that big, you just can't sustain it. It's impossible.
entire conversation about tutorial design boils down to the concept of player familiarity. It's probably safe to assume that your player's familiarity will be almost zero when they first boot up your game, and if you do a good job introducing your mechanics gradually, that familiarity number should raise at a good pace by the time your players will reach your game's ending. But what
I think, to be fair, Superheart didn't actually have any tutorials, right? It literally would just pop up saying kill them all, and it's like red guys chasing you. You kind of know to kill them.
familiarity
That was pretty streamlined. And obviously, like, if you got the pistol, you know how a pistol worked. If you got a shotgun, you've used a shotgun in a video game before.
number should raise at a good pace by the time your players will reach your game's ending. But what about someone who played your game for a while only to put it down and pick it back up a few months later without benefiting from those high familiarity levels anymore? Should you account for that in your design, just like The Witcher 3 did, through their story recap cinematics that play right after loading screens, acting as a reminder for where you left the game off? And this is often mentioned as a lovely little feature for those of us with busy lives unable to finish games in one sitting.
Previously on The Walking Dead.
Damn, that's a throwback. That actually reminded me, like, back when Telltale games were good.
I would absolutely love to see a game where I can pause at any time and with a little cursor point at any element on the screen, be it a UI slot or an entity, and have the game remind me of the functionality of what I'm pointing at. I think this would be a great accessibility feature to aid with the player's familiarity of your game. One thing to keep in mind while designing your starting area is the difficulty, where a good rule of thumb is if the tutorial seems like it's just the right difficulty for you, then it's probably too difficult for your players. And that's why we all remember the parking lot tutorial sequence in Driver.
This is the worst tutorial I've ever played. Fuck this game!
So, in conclusion,
I thought that was Civvy then.
If the
Oh, no.
tutorial-
I remember that. Yeah. The Driver tutorial. If anyone didn't know, Driver is like a driving game on the PS1. I know, surprise, big shock. But it has one of the single worst tutorials in the whole game because it's fucking hard. You're basically on a timer and you need to do this checklist of like burnout, handbrake, Salmon, however you say that, 180, 360. But yeah, no, this was hard because you had to do all this in like a minute, I think. And there was no guidance, no like arrows or anything. You have to do it all on your own.
Remember the parking lot tutorial sequence in Driver.
This is the worst tutorial I've ever played. Fuck this game!
I'll show you guys the Driver tutorial. It is really hard. It looks easy, but if you don't know what you're doing, so that's a brake test, that's a speed test, and then that's a handbrake. He did a reverse 180. Okay. And this is a lap, I think. This is a lap. Oh no, this is the Slammin. Whatever it's called. Oh, that's the lap. No, that's the lap. Okay. Burnout is when you accelerate and reverse at the same time, I'm pretty sure. Like brake and accelerate. Oh, that's the salmon, yeah. And then he got burnout. He makes it look so easy, but it's fucking hard. Oh, that's right, yeah, if you get 3 strikes, you're out. And then he hit a car twice. You see, though, like, he's already about to run out of time, and he's still got to do the 180 and the 360. Like, that's a tutorial, and he barely makes it. Look at that. He's about to run out of time. That's hard, man. And if you don't beat that tutorial, you're not allowed to play the game. It locks you out. You can't skip it. It's a mandatory tutorial. How do you say it? S-L-A-L-O-M. How do you say that word, man?
Slalom.
Slalom. Oh, slalom. Okay.
Luigi, what'd you do to your dick? I know you're into the modification stuff, but did you have to put a flashlight in there?